Hey, what's going on, guys? All right, next up we have Survival of the Fittest 2006. This is a pretty good show. I would say this is probably the second best overall Survival of the Fittest show from top to bottom. The qualifying matches weren't that great. They always have trouble producing good qualifying matches, but everything was pretty much solid. I say David Richards and Matt Sydal was probably the best qualifier, or maybe the tag match. Bryan Danielson and Samoa Joe had the most disappointing match on this show, so you could, I don't know. Next up, we had Survival of the Fittest match. The match consisted of Matt Sydal, Delirious, Aries, and the Briscoes. So there's only 5 people in this match. The Sydal and Delirious worked together, and they eliminated the Briscoes. And this is by far the highlight of Delirious's career. I mean, him and Sydal stepped up to the plate. Put on a great finals here. It came down to both of those guys, and it was just great stuff. 4.25 stars. Surprisingly, just an excellent match. This is the Survival of the Fittest match is the match of the year candidate. I'll probably give it 4.25 stars. All right, next up, we get Motor City Madness 2006. This is where ROH's slump definitely begins. I think 2006 probably would have been their best year, but the fall of 2006, they just put on some really bad shows. They booked too many shows. They booked 42 shows in 2006. That's a little bit too much. So yeah, Motor City Madness. This is where it all started to go bad. Just the undercard was just really tough to sit through. The highlight of the undercard was, Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal started feuding with the Kings of Wrestling, so that was pretty cool. That eventually this would lead up to a big match for the championships. But everything else you could skip on the undercard, just really bad stuff. Then we had Bryan Danielson and Aries for the ROH Championship. This is probably the worst Bryan Danielson Aries match. Some weird things going on here. They both lost their luggage. Danielson wrestled this match without knee pads. It was just a really weird atmosphere and just a really weird setting. However, I'll still give it 3.75 stars. A very solid 3.75 stars. The wrestling was phenomenal, like it always is between Aries and Danielson. You can't go wrong with both of those guys. Just great technical wrestling, just great stuff. Briscoes versus Homicide and Samoa Joe, a great brawl. They brawled all over the arena. I usually don't like these type of matches, but this worked. There was crazy spots, great intensity. Joe was intense as hell, so was Homicide. They brawled out into the parking lot, and then Mark Briscoe actually did a shooting star press off the top of a building, which was pretty sick. So definitely check this match out. Like I said, but the undercard was pretty bad, so stay away from the undercard. All right, next up we have Suffocation. Suffocation is probably the worst show in ROH history. Probably the worst show of 2006. It's definitely up there. Some guys ask me what shows should I stay away from. This show is without a doubt on top of that list. So. Bryan Danielson's match is really short. Brent Albright and Christopher Daniels. This is Brent Albright's debut. I'm not a big fan of Albright. This is okay. 2.75, nothing special. Aries and Claudio Castagnoli. These two guys never really clicked for me. They never really had that great singles match. This is like 2.75. David Richards and Jay Briscoe. Give these guys credit. They saved the show from being a really bad show. This was 3.5 stars. Well, actually, I have to say the show is still really bad. But, Davey and Jay Briscoe, probably the highlight of the show. And then you had a pretty good match between Delirious and Matt Sydal. Those two matches were pretty good. Delirious and Sydal had a rematch from Survival of the Fittest. The crowd loved this. They were chanting, that was awesome after this match. So that was pretty good. And then the main event, I thought it was pretty bad. You had Homicide, Samoa Joe versus Steve Corino and Adam Pearce. I don't know. I just don't think a main event featuring Adam Pearce and Corino at that stage would have gone over well. And the actual match is pretty bad. I mean, there were some good spots. It was okay. It wasn't terrible. But the good thing about this is had good storyline progression. They Steve Corino actually took out a plastic bag and suffocated Homicide. Or tried to suffocate him. And this is good storyline progression building up the final Homicide Corino match, which would take place the next weekend. All right, next up we have Irresistible Forces. Out of all these shows that I'm reviewing, this is by far the best show. Probably the only show that I would actually recommend checking out. You had some very solid singles matches here. You had Christopher Daniels and Aries. We haven't seen those guys go at it. But we haven't seen those guys go at it that much in ROH. This is one of the few matches that they've had. This is by far the best match, solid 3.5 stars. It got 15 minutes out there. Just really good stuff. Jay Briscoe versus Matt Sydal. I thought it was okay. A solid 3. Actually, I say a solid 3.5 star match. Really, Jay Briscoe was a great singles wrestler at the time. Matt Sydal was one of the few guys that stepped it up every single night and gave a great performance during the fall of 2006. And the Briscoes were I love the Briscoes in 2006 heading into 2007. They just put on a lot of muscle. They were very, very hungry. They were just great. And Mark Briscoe and Davey Richards had a solid match here. That was good. Then the main event was Bryan Danielson and Samoa Joe. No disqualification match. There must be a winner, non-title. Even though it was non-title, the crowd was hyper. They were really into it. Chicago crowd was great. A nice combination of hardcore wrestling and technical wrestling. Just great intensity. Samoa Joe got the win. This would set up a steel cage match at the next show in Chicago between Samoa Joe and Bryan Danielson. So yeah, that was a solid 4-star match. Definitely check out Irresistible Forces. All right, next up we have Honor Reclaims Boston. This show was pretty bad. This is an example where the main event definitely saved the show. The undercard was pretty bad. Nigel McGuinness and John Walters opened up the show, which was pretty good. This is one of the bright spots on the show. John Walters is a Boston guy, so I guess they brought him in for this, and him and Nigel had a solid match. Danielson Hero was kind of disappointing. Claudio Castagnoli and Matt Sydal, they have a lot of chemistry. Their match was pretty good. Not as good as the Driven match, but it was pretty close. And you have Bryan Danielson and Delirious, which was very, very disappointing. The crowd was just dead for this. The problem with Delirious is the crowd just never buys into him winning the ROH Championship. And this might be the worst Bryan Danielson match I think I've ever seen in ROH. So yeah, that was very, very disappointing. But the main event was awesome. You had Austin Aries and Roderick Strong versus Kenta and Davey Richards. Excellent match, 4.5 stars, one of the top 10 matches of 2006. Just great stuff like you would expect. Aries and Kenta just slapped the taste out of each other's mouths. Davey Richards was awesome in 2006. I know he's gotten a lot better since then, but he was still great. Back then. He main evented a lot of shows. He definitely had a lot of talent. Roderick Strong, give him credit. I would say he's probably like the Chris Benoit of Ring of Honor. Very reliable. This is an excellent tag team match. Everyone should check this out, even though the undercard was pretty bad. All right, next up, we have The Bitter End, which is a pretty bad show. On paper, the show looked pretty good, but it was just disappointing. Christopher Daniels and Matt Cross. This was okay. Matt Cross made his debut here. He could do a lot of stuff that no one else could do, but that was a solid match. Danielson and Jimmy Rave versus Nigel and Samoa Joe. 3-star match. Pretty solid stuff. This is where the Nigel Jimmy Rave feud started. The Briscoes versus Davey Richards and Delirious. The ending to this match was awesome. The Briscoes and Davey worked very well together. This was a solid 3.25 stars. Kings of Wrestling versus Austin Aries and Roderick Strong. Very disappointing. Not as good as their other match. It ended in a disqualification. Kenta and Matt Sydal. Great stuff. Match of the night. 3.75. Kenta taking on one of the ROH's top young stars at the time. It was just great. Very easy to sit through. Very fast-paced action. Go to Sleep at the End was sick. Just a great match. Kenta's farewell match of 2006. This was his last match for ROH in 2006. He went to Pro Wrestling Noah. And there's a pretty good aftermath with Samoa Joe slapping Kenta to kind of send a message to Morishima, which is pretty cool. And then the main event, Homicide, Steve Corino. The bad definitely outweighs the good. Corino was just really out of shape here. He looked very fat. Could not do a lot. He was huffing and puffing out there. But give Homicide credit. He tried to make this match work. It was pretty brutal. There was some nice hardcore spots, pretty good hardcore stuff, but the crowd was just dead for it. I will give it a good rating though. I'll give it a solid 3 stars. They did bust their ass. It was this ended the whole Homicide Corino feud, which is probably the worst. Or I'm sorry, one of the probably the best feud in ROH history. But this is probably their worst match. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. All right, I'm actually going to add in Black Friday Fallout. This show was a little bit better than I anticipated. I heard it was a really bad show, but it was bad, but it wasn't like awful. The gauntlet match is pretty tough to watch. You had when Brent Albright and BJ Whitmer went on it, it was pretty bad. Everyone was chanting boring. Just a really dull match between those two. But the gauntlet was actually saved by Nigel and Jimmy Jacobs. Came down to those two guys. They put on a solid match to end the gauntlet match. Kings of Wrestling versus Aries and Strong. Another solid match from those guys. This time it was a street fight, so this is pretty solid. Shingo actually got involved and cost Roderick the match to set up their match the next night. Then we had Shingo and Mark Briscoe, who was kind of average. Shingo wasn't as good back then as he is now. Homicide and Jimmy Rave. This kind of planted the seeds for a Jimmy Rave title shot against Homicide in the future. So Samoa Joe, Jay Briscoe, a solid 3-star match. Nothing more than that. It was okay. Main event was pretty good. You know, I would say it was almost great. You have Matt Sydal, Christopher Daniels. They went over Davey Richardson, Delirious, built some momentum into their tag team title shot against the Kings of Wrestling. This is just great action. You know, just a really, really fun match. You know, this kind of saved the show from being a disaster. So yeah, this Black Friday Fallout, you know, it's probably one of the worst shows of 2006, but I wouldn't say it was the worst, like some people do say. So, all right.